Happy morning to you all. Blue Stars Higher Secondary School welcomes you all for learning the second part of the story after 20 years. We have already learned about this story after 20 years, which was written by O. Henry. He is otherwise known as William Sidney. Now, in this class, we are going to learn about the gist of the story. Jimmy Wells, Silky Bob, and a plaincloth man. That means the colleague of Jimmy Wells. By this story, we have already learned the characters of the story, the author of the story, at the same time the whole story of this after 20 years. In this story, William Sidney Porter, whose pen name is O. Henry, is known as the master of the American short story. His a wonderful work, one of the wonderful work after 20 years. This story tells us the story of two old friends who had made an appointment 20 years ago to see each other again in New York City. They had lived very different ways of lives since the day they parted. What happens when they meet will surprise you. Yes, their meeting will surprise you. That's the story. So, this story focuses on the reunion of two old friends, Jimmy Wells and Silky Bob. Through their brief encounter, the two explore the themes of friendship, loyalty, and trust. The patrolman meets Bob. This is a story after 20 years. It opens with a policeman on night patrol. It's nearly 10 o'clock and all's quiet as he walks his beat, checking logs for safety. Suddenly, a tough figure standing in a doorway catches his attention and he approaches. Bob, the man waiting, speaks up to the policeman and reassures the officer that he is not looking to cause any trouble. Just waiting on a friend with whom he had made an appointment 20 years ago to meet at that spot. Bob and Jimmy were friends when they were younger. Bob left to try his luck in the West. He and Jimmy made a pact to meet again 20 years later. So, Jimmy Wells and Silky Bob, they were friends. But Bob left to try his luck in the West. He went to the West side. But the friends made a pact to meet again after 20 years. Jimmy Wells recognizes Bob, the man who is waiting, lights. The man who is waiting there on the street, he lights a cigar. It's a bad habit, right? Pretty good. But this habit itself made a big twist in this story. He lights a cigar he is holding, and in the brief flash of illumination, the officer notes that the person before him has a little white scar near his right eyebrow. It's one of the identification mark, isn't it? So, he is having what mark he is having? A little white scar near his right eyebrow. Bob tells about his friendship. Bob tells the lawman. Bob, he only disclosed all the things to the person who came to the what it is, who came there for the patrol. So he discloses everything about his friend Jimmy Wells, who had been more like a brother to him when they were young. Bob praises Jimmy's characters. Bob likes him very much, that's why he praises Jimmy's character and assures the policeman that he will keep their appointment at 10 o'clock. He is saying to the policeman surely that his friend will come there sharply at 10 o'clock. Jimmy was always loyal. Yes, he is praising him. Jimmy was a loyal person. He always was the truest chap in the world. He was the truest chap, truest friend in the world. Bob's life in the West. Now we are going to learn about the life, Bob's life. Bob wanted to live a wealthy life, full of money, luxurious life. So he left for West to make easy money, to earn more and easiest money. He was well dressed. He looked respectable with his diamond scarf pin and an expensive watch, diamond encrusted watch. It takes the best to put a razor edge on him. He became a lawbreaker in the West and became a criminal. Because of earning money, he went to the illegal path of life, isn't it? That's why what happened? He earned a lot of things like diamond scarf pin and then luxurious dresses. At the same time, he is having an expensive watch, whatever it may be. But all this made him as a criminal. Jimmy avoids Bob as it's already quite nearly 10. The officer asks if the man will wait any longer for Jimmy. And the patient friend says he will give him half an hour as the lawman continues his patrol. The tall man meets Bob. Another man arrives after 20 minutes, who Bob believes to be his friend Jimmy. So Bob, he believes that the coming person, he may be my friend. As the two men greet each other heartily, they hugged each other. They greeted each other happily, heartily. Bob begins to recognize some unfamiliar characteristics in his friend. Namely, he seems taller than he remembered. So he recognized some unfamiliar characteristics. What it is? He seems very taller than he remembered. He accepts his friend's reply that he had grown some in 20 years until they come across the bright light of a drugstore. Bob gets arrested. Bob realizes that the man in front of him doesn't have the same nose as Jimmy. Jimmy had a straight nose which was different from the tall man's. It's far too late for him to escape arrest from the plainclothesman posing as Jimmy. Before taking him into custody, however, the officer handed Bob a note from patrolman Wells, whom he had accidentally met earlier. So he handed over a note to Bob. Who gave the note to the policeman? Yes, Jimmy Wells. Because Jimmy Wells, he had accidentally met earlier. Jimmy Wells wrote this note to Silky Bob. He handed it to his colleague and then he asked him to submit it to the silky bar, isn't it? In this letter, that means in this note, what he has said, Jimmy Wells explains that he was in fact the officer who was with Bob at the site of Big Joe Brady's restaurant at 10 o'clock. But when Bob struck a match to light his cigar, he recognized Bob's face as the one wanted in Chicago. Jimmy did not have the nerve to arrest his old friend, so he had left before he could be recognized and found a plainclothes officer to arrest him. Yes, what happened to Jimmy Wells? Why he sent a note through his friend? Because he is a genuine cop. He was a typical New York uniformed cop. It seems to him that as much as he felt sorry for his friend Silky Bob, he think Jimmy did not exactly what he had done under the circumstances. Jimmy could not bring himself to arrest his old friend personally. But he solved that problem by having him arrested by a plainclothes detective. Jimmy, he acted just like Jimmy as one officer of the law doing his duty. Jimmy had to choose between protecting his friend and implementing justice. Jimmy was truthful and dependable 20 years back, and he proved himself to be true and dependable 20 years after, although his truthfulness and loyalty had inevitably focused in his profession. So, by this note, he clarified everything. He informed everything to his friend Silky Bob. So, Jimmy's message to Bob. Bob, who read the note with his hands steady, trembled at the end. So, this was the end of the story. Now, we are going to learn about the exercises given in the textbook. The cop suddenly slowed his walk when he heard the barking of dogs. False. The friends grew up together in the city of New York. True. Both Jimmy and Bob were of the same age. False. The friends parted one night after watching a movie together. False. The friends could not keep in touch because they lost each other's phone numbers. False. Bob wanted to stay for half an hour more than the appointed time. True. Jimmy grew a little taller after he was 20. False. Bob realized that the tall man was not Jimmy Wells from the shape of his nose. True. On the beat. We are going to learn the meaning of the words mentioned in the story. On the beat means on duty, walking around the assigned area. Guardian of peace, a policeman. Arm in arm, with arms linked together. Plainclothes man, a policeman in civilian clothes while on duty. Answer the following in 3 or 4 sentences. What did Bob share with the cop about their friendship? Bob said that he and his Jimmy lived together in New York. They were good friends. 20 years back, they had dined in Big Joe Brady's restaurant. They decided to find their own ways for the livelihood. After the dinner, they had taken a promise that they would meet in the place at the same time after 20 years. Bob went to the West and Jimmy stayed in New York. Next question, what are the strengths and weaknesses of Jimmy Wells from Bob's point of view? Jimmy would not go out of New York. He could not earn as much as Bob. Jimmy was low in his dealings but a good fellow. He would surely keep his promise of meeting him at the particular place, though he had taken the promise 20 years ago. Was Bob hopeful of his friend's arrival? How do you know? Bob was hopeful that his friend would come to meet him. He told the policeman that his friend would never forget his promise. He was ready to wait for half an hour more than the appointed time. How did the cop come to understand that Bob had been successful in the West? Bob had an expensive large diamond scarf pin which an ordinary man couldn't wear. When Bob took out his watch to see the time, the cop noticed that it was a handsome watch with the attachment of small diamonds. Thus he came to understand that Bob had been successful in the West. Bob's life in the West was not a bed of roses. Give reasons. Bob said that the life in the West was not that easy. The West had put him into many critical situations. He had to compete with many people to earn his livelihood. Why didn't Jimmy Wells, being a cop himself, arrest Bob? Jimmy Wells gave a letter to Bob through the plainclothes man. He wrote that when he saw Bob's face, he understood that he was the wanted criminal in Chicago. But he himself couldn't arrest him because he was once his best friend. Who do you think has been more successful between the two? Give reasons. Jimmy Wells has been more successful than Bob. He is now a respectable policeman, though his earning may not be as big as what Bob has. Bob has become a criminal and has earned huge money, but he couldn't lead a peaceful life. These are the paragraph answers. You just see they compare and contrast the character of Jimmy Wells and Bob with suitable references from the story to support your view. After 20 years, written by O. Henry, Jimmy Wells and Bob, friends, lived in New York, parted to meet after 20 years. Bob to West, Wells stayed. Bob changed a lot, a criminal. Wells a policeman. Bob came, couldn't recognize. Wells identified, respected friendship, sent another policeman, arrested Bob. By using all these clues, we are going to write a paragraph answer. O. Henry, in his short story After 20 Years, describes the friendship of two men, Jimmy Wells and Silky Bob. They lived in New York when Bob was 18 and Jimmy was 20. They decided to go their own way to find their livelihood. When they parted, they decided to meet each other after 20 years. On that day, they dined in Big Joe Brady's restaurant and said they would meet in the same place at the same time after 20 years. Bob went to the West and Wells stayed in New York. So far, they did not have much difference in their characters. But the West changed Bob a lot. It made him as a criminal, isn't it? He became a criminal and earned a lot. Wells became a respectable policeman. As they planned, Bob came to the place at the scheduled time. Wells was also in the same place as the patrolman. Wells identified Bob as the wanted criminal from Chicago, but Bob couldn't identify Wells. In the 20 years, Bob became very rich with the ill-gotten money. Wells was not that rich in terms of money, but he was rich in character. He respected his friendship with Bob, so he did not arrest him. He sent another plainclothesman to arrest him. Next question, means should justify the end. Explain the adage with reference to O. Henry's story. These are the clues. Steps should be right. Steps to justify the end. Will and Bob friends. Bob rich with ill-gotten money. Wells respectable policeman. Bob rich end. Means bad. Ill-gotten money. No help. End justifies the means. Means should justify the end. It means the steps we take to reach the end should be right socially and morally. The steps should justify the end when we reach it. The end may be to become rich, but the steps we take to reach our end should justify the end. If we become rich by foul means, the means will not justify the end. O. Henry, in his short story, After 20 Years, introduces two characters, Jimmy Wells and Silky Bob. Both were good friends. They parted ways to reach for their livelihood. Wells became a respectable policeman, but he was not very rich. Bob became very rich, but only with ill-gotten money. He was a criminal and he was wanted by the police. His end might be great, but his means would never justify the end. At the end of the story, the money he had earned through his criminal activities did not help him. Wells' end is not very great, but his means as a professional policeman justify his end. This is the next story. Tell me. Tell me who your friends are, and I shall tell you who you are. How will you explain this statement in the light of Jimmy's and Bob's friendship? O. Henry, in his short story, After 20 Years, introduces two friends, Jimmy Wells and Silky Bob. They were friends for many years. Both of them lived in New York when Bob was 18 and Wells was 20. They parted ways to find their own means to earn money. When they parted, they decided to meet after 20 years in the same place at the same time. Bob went to the west to find his ways, but Wells stayed in New York. After 20 years, Bob came to the place and he was met by a patrolman. The patrolman was none other than Wells. He realized Bob, but he understood that he was a criminal wanted in Chicago. But he did not want to arrest his friend, so he sent another policeman in plain clothes to arrest him. In the beginning, their friendship might prove the statement true, but at the end it was totally different. This is the next question. To your shock, you find out that your friend is indulging in some wrong activity. Will you avoid him or her or try to correct him or her? Give reasons for your answer. If my friend is indulging in some wrong activity, surely it will shock me. I will not avoid him, but I will try to correct him. I can give many reasons for this. To err is human. Most of the time people fall into some wrong activity because of some unforeseen circumstances. We have to decide whether we should hate the man or the situation. I will hate the sin rather than the sinner. I have the hope that my friend will listen to me if I tell him in the proper way. Moreover, my friend is a nice guy and he can change his way of life if he comes to realize the serious consequences of his action. So I will try my best to mend him, not in friendship. This is the last question. What would you do in this situation? If you were Jimmy Wells, substantiate your reason. If I were Jimmy Wells, I must have done the same as Wells has done. Bob had become a hardcore criminal. If he had just started slipping from the right attitude, there might have been some possibilities to help him pull out of his criminal activities. But in the given situation, it's very difficult to change him. Moreover, as a responsible patrolman, I may not have any other choice. If I avoided arresting him, he would, as usual, indulge in unlawful activities to hoard wealth. It's likely that he might attempt homicide to rob the hapless people. Moreover, evading duty would prick my conscience as an honest policeman. In my opinion, nobody is above law, since duty consciousness takes precedence over friendship. I have Hobson's choice in this case. Thank you for listening the story with a lot of patience. Thank you.